Real-time Sovryn is go.
Ooh, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, coming to you again from the very weird place that is Michigan. You know, it's, I'd like to take just to give you a preview of what we're talking about here, not that you wouldn't see in the title, depending where you're listening to this, whether it is, or watching this even, all you're really seeing is out of a hotel room window. Whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you happen to be rocking this, or if you're on Pocket Casts, of course, always love that. You saw the title, but let me give you a little preview. I'd like to take a moment today to talk about Satan. My dad. No, kidding about that. Well, maybe half kidding. Depends who you ask. Because if you ask the right people, if you ask some of the Christians, they'll tell you, well, all Jews are the son of Satan. So, or the spawn. Anyway. Regardless, I definitely got the sense that Michigan is a very, very Christian place. And I don't think I'm wrong about that. Pretty intense, some of it around here. So, and I've actually, in my travels with the Empress of Space-Time and Beauty, actually seen some mega churches around here, and I was kind of stunned by that, but so it is. So to talk about Satan, something that just kind of struck me is, Christians have this real, concept, belief, right? That somewhat comes out of the Bible, quote unquote. Usually when I say the word Bible, I mean on a broader context, meaning Old Testament, New Testament. If I'm talking about, the only text that matters, that being what Christians would call the Old Testament, I would call it Torah or the Tanakh, or Talmud Torah, something like that. Anyway, recording this on an iPhone, by the way. Fortunately, it's very lightweight because I'm just holding it up. Anyway, this concept that the Lord works in mysterious ways, right? Which is the basic idea that you can't understand why God does what he does, how he does it. You can barely really understand God, okay? Now, it's a concept, not that I would dare apply logic to Christianity as much as it tries to, but the concept, logically makes some sense, right? Why? Because we're talking about a supposed being that, depending if you're talking about like St. Augustine's, concepts out of City of God and whatever, the idea that God exists outside of space-time, okay? Out of space and time. When you're talking about a being that apparently created the entire universe, as in the entire fucking universe. Now, that's an important point to hit on, and I want to. But, the idea that the Lord works in mysterious ways, in the very literal sense of mystery, how the hell could you even begin to understand how a being that operates on that level, how they think, how they work, how they do what they do, and all this? It's actually, it really, as far as statements that Christians often make, it's one of the smarter ones, based within their own theological framework, right? So, I'm not saying that, if I were a Christian, I would completely agree with it. How the hell could you understand this sort of thing? But now, like I said, this idea that God created the entire universe. Okay. Now, I come at things from a more Epicurean understanding, in that, an Epicurean, or Epicurus himself, Greek philosopher, hedonist, would have made the claim that even though he was an atomist, as in he believed in the concept of the atom and the way that, matter makes up things and energy, he would make the claim that there was no beginning. There was no point of creation. The universe has just always been here. Now, I think that's actually accurate. In fact, it's ironic in Judaism, if you are, if you get expelled from, if you're excommunicated, as it were, kind of like Spinoza, if you're excommunicated from Judaism, you're actually called Hipparchos, which means you're basically called Epicurus. You're called an Epicurean. Why? Because you're committing in their concept, in rabbinic Judaism, and I say rabbinic, in rabbinic Judaism's concept, you're committing the real original sin, the real problem, or, like you're denying the ultimate truth that there is a creator in the beginning of creation. And that's their claim, is that's what Epicurus did. Anyway, that's just a fun side subject to get into here. Like I say, real-time Sovryn episodes, they're meant to be a little more random, a little shorter, even though when we have guests on, it could be a much bigger deal, or it could be a much longer affair, and who knows where it could go. Regardless, so this idea that God created the universe and that there is a beginning point of creation. Now, I think that, and this is coming from somebody who actually has a doctorate of divinity, but anyway, I think this concept comes out of a understanding of the universe that is incredibly immature. Now, what I mean by immature is not necessarily, it's not derogatory, okay? It's immature in the sense that it has a lack of development and a lack of knowledge and understanding that we have now, okay? So this idea of a creator God, I think, comes out of, and you're saying, what does all this have to do with Satan? I'm going to get to that. This idea that there is a creator God can actually make some sense and fit into, the kind of conception or concepts that the human brain can handle when you think that ultimately the earth is flat, right? And that maybe you're just on some bubble going up and down and whatever, like when you think that the universe is so small, so tiny, and when you think that the earth is the only thing that matters, and that maybe that's even remotely close to all that there is, sure, the idea that there is this being that actually created that, such a smaller landscape could, is a lot more palatable and something that can register in the human mind. But today, and not just today, really, we've known this for quite some time, but when you consider the enormity that we understand of the universe, then I think that becomes a much bigger problem, okay? And, the Christians are fortunate to have a statement like, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Because it's handing off, it's putting it all on mystery, and it's handing off all of the logical processes, all the reasoning that the human mind has to go through. But now, what does this have to do with Satan, okay? Now, without getting into a huge argument about, wait a minute, who actually is Satan and all of this, this is stuff I've talked about on Patreon Q&As. I've gotten a lot of questions about it. And the idea that the concept of a personage that is Satan is actually the Egyptian character of Sokar. Certainly I talk about that. And we could get into how ultimately the use of the term Satan is actually Hasatan, and it's generally a verb in Torah, in the Tanakh. We don't have to get into all of that here. We really only have one point where a character that would be attributed to Satan or Hasatan is talked about and is actually and not only talked about but does talking. You really only have one point. I mean, you could maybe think of a couple others, and this is without talking about like Lucifer, O son of the morning, all that jazz, because I've already covered how dumb that is. Lucifer isn't a person. Lucifer is a very common term. Lucifer actually isn't even a Hebrew term. It's not. It could not possibly be the name of some ancient evil being, because the term Lucifer is a Latin term put into the Vulgate by Jerome, and that's where it all started. There was no Lucifer before then, and even then it's all misattribution. So again, I've covered this stuff hours and hours, and I'm not going to necessarily do that here. Okay, but the only place that we really get any concept of this potential character named Satan would, of course, be the book of Job in the very beginning of it, where you have what often gets called the Galactic Council, where God is talking seemingly to angels, maybe some other gods, who knows, right? And keep that in mind that at the time, Judaism was never, or not until Rabbinic Judaism, was never really monotheistic. It was more of a monolatry in the sense that, no, we only follow our God, but we get it that there are other gods, right? Okay. So we have this galactic council that occurs. Satan shows up, okay, this character called Satan, this adversary, who is clearly an adversary and kind of a judge against the character of Job. And he's actually not seen as an evil guy. And he's welcomed into what one would assume must be heaven, this galactic council where God is talking with people, blah, blah, blah. It all sounds very human, oddly. It does not sound like the gathering of some being that exists outside of space-time, right? And there's just a conversation being had. Now, again, it's all very quaint. And it's not just quaint because the text is short, because actually our understanding of how the book of Job was written is that it was probably expanded upon later on when it was, closer perhaps to when it was included into the Tanakh at large, okay? So there would have been a chance to expand on things there, especially with later theological concepts that say the Pharisees or other progenitors to, the rabbinic tradition. They could have done that. But it didn't happen, and it was all laid out as it was. And what's it all comes off as very human. It all comes off as very simple, and quaint is really the best word. It really doesn't feel like we're talking about, like I said, beings that exist outside of space-time. And it also doesn't mesh well with the idea that during the mystery of iniquity, which is like, wait a minute, the mystery of iniquity is a Christian concept of how could Satan, how do you defy God? Why do you defy God? If you exist in heaven, what the hell are you thinking? Now, this is a key point in what I actually want to get to. Okay, but within the mystery of iniquity, the idea was, and in fact, even in the book of Isaiah, right, where it's Lucifer, O star of the morning, how you've fallen, Lucifer says, I will be like the Most High, and all this, which is what supposedly kind of answers the mystery of iniquity. The weird part within that, of course, within that itself, and that's a side subject, the weird part within that is, wait a minute, he got kicked out of heaven. So what the hell is he doing in heaven in the book of Job? It doesn't make any sense, unless you're going to try and say that Job actually existed before Adam, which, not to say that pre-Adamite Christianity isn't a thing. It was. I don't think it's as popular now, but there was a time when that was a thing. So, but you run into a very real problem with that. It's like, no, he got kicked out. He's done. He's in hell, right? According to most Christians. Anyway, obviously this is all nonsense, but all right. But here's the rub. Here's where I really want to get to with all this. So you really don't want to go to the book of Job because, again, it kind of makes a mockery of this idea of this creator God that is, omniscient, omnipresent, and all that. Even though, towards the end of the book of Job, it seems like God is showing all of creation. Granted, he only shows Job creation on earth, doesn't show anything around the rest of the universe, which kind of leads to, that idea that this concept of a creator God really only makes sense when you think Earth is all there is, or more or less all there is, if you're more of a flat Earth theorist. Now, I could also get into a side subject how, the Tanakh, particularly the book of Psalms, makes it clear that the Earth is actually a sphere, and we could also talk about how the Chaldeans seem to have a very good understanding of the stars and perhaps the idea that there are other planets and all this, but we're not going to go there right now. So my ultimate point, all this preamble, is really just to get to the idea that, Christians have this concept of evil, right? What is evil? And evil is basically anything It's, or, like their simplest understanding would be anything that goes against God's law, anything that goes against God. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier the mystery of iniquity, right? Like, if Satan exists in heaven, or anyone or anything exists in heaven, and it's heaven, which is supposedly paradise, why would you want to leave that? How could you not enjoy that? What's the issue there? How does that happen? And it's a great, it's also a great question. Very, very simplistic, but a great question. So, again, to call it a mystery is accurate, just like we talked about, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Like I said, that statement is one of the smarter things you can say. Because, again, we're talking about a being that supposedly exists outside of space-time, omniscient, omnipresent, everywhere, created this massive fucking universe, right? But my question, it's a rhetorical question to the Christians, is if Satan is anywhere remotely as powerful as you claim him to be, how could you possibly understand what his motivations are? I mean, and that's why we call it the mystery of iniquity. But not only that, how could you possibly understand, like these concepts of good and evil when we are talking about beings that play not just on a galactic stage, but on a universal stage? How could a book like the Bible possibly encapsulate the thoughts, the rules, the desires, the everything of existence, when we're talking about beings that operate at that level and that operate in that way? Like, Christians really do have to come out and say, well, it's just an act of faith. Now, I get that, okay? And one can even argue that there's some value in the concept of faith. But what I think a big part of what's going on here is you have very, very ancient, or let's just put it simply, like Bronze Age ideas that, have a certain antiquity, that have a real antiquity to them. And because of that, they've really never updated themselves for the time. I mean, and look, there are a lot of brilliant scientists, quantum theorists, and so on, who are Christians. And yet they still hold on to these Bronze Age concepts of good and evil. They should know better. They should know, like, wait a minute. If we're talking about beings operating on the levels of what we can only begin to understand, and we can barely understand these things, quantum physics and so on, how can I possibly know what good and evil is? How can I really know? And you say, well, you have to take it on an act of faith. But again, I don't think that faith matches up. I think what we have is a case where the antiquity of, well, this is just what's always been said and believed and how it's always been interpreted, has carried down for over 1,000 years. And it's never been, re-examined or updated to contemplate our understanding of the immensity of existence, the immensity of the universe, and so much more. Because really then you should walk away completely humbled, not just by the supposed power of this creator God, but you should walk away completely humbled by whoever this Satan is that has done all the things that you claim, because that is a being operating on levels that the human mind couldn't begin to understand. It's very strange to me. Like, the level of, it reminds me of a point that I've brought up a lot of times on Sovereign Tech, that for people to believe you, you don't have to be right. You don't have to have the facts. All you have to be is confident. And the level of confidence that Christians put on display on a daily basis in their day-to-day lives is mind-blowing to me. And it's not only mind-blowing to me, in my opinion, it's disrespectful to existence itself. And even if there were a creator God, it's disrespectful to that being for you to walk around pretending like you understand concepts of what is good and what is evil on a scale the size of the universe, with beings who operate, again, at that level. It doesn't come off as confident, in my opinion. It comes off as incredibly stupid, because you are not respecting, again, the enormity, the immensity of the situation. And so it blows my mind, just the certainty that they have, and this again, this lack of humbleness. Kind of reminds me of, one of my favorite bands, the Rolling Stones. Sympathy for the Devil. I think you could use some sympathy for the devil. Try and see, wait a minute, what? I can't begin to understand how this being operates. Go ahead, follow all the rules you think that exist within your good book and whatever. But maybe not walk around with such a condemning attitude, thinking that you understand what's good and what's evil when you contemplate the size of the universe and the possibilities of existence that we can already formulate today, even in our very limited means, scientific or otherwise. So that's what I have today, coming from the very strange place known as Michigan. And just think about it. Think about it. Consider the possibility that you can't understand good and evil. And then maybe go so far, if you're feeling a little bold, consider that maybe good and evil just don't exist. I'll see all of you, on the other side.